A little girl with an Asian face, yet her parents were two Americans. They were on a flight to the United States, and the little girl's destiny was about to change forever. Her name was Xie Xiangjun. At just 6 months old, she had been abandoned by her biological parents due to illness and taken in by an orphanage in Guizhou, China. Shangjuan's life had begun with a nightmare, but when she turned 2, fate offered her a second chance. Becca and Dan were a couple from America. Although they already had 2 sons, they still dreamt of having a sweet little daughter. Because of Becca's health condition, the couple decided to adopt a girl rather than try for another child themselves. In 2015, by a stroke of chance, they learned about China's orphan adoption program. After a week of discussions with their family, they submitted an adoption application. However, they had no idea just how complicated the paperwork and procedures for an international adoption would be. It took Becca half a year simply to gather all the necessary documents. Fortunately, as there were many children in Chinese orphanages waiting for families, the process moved smoothly once their eligibility was confirmed. While browsing profiles of children, Becca immediately set her heart on the adorable Xie Xiangjun. She named the little girl Sayla and could hardly wait to bring her home. To raise the funds needed for the trip to China and the adoption fees, Becca and Dan began selling off many of their possessions. When their friends and relatives heard about it, they rushed to help, all excited about the arrival of a new family member. Later, in order to raise even more money, the couple sold their house in Virginia and moved into a new home in Ohio. Thankfully, Dan soon found a job as an art teacher. They also successfully raised additional funds through a charitable project. Before Sayla even arrived in America, Becca lovingly made her some clothes and decorations by hand, and she decorated the girl's room to be warm and welcoming. In May 2016, the couple finally received official approval to adopt Xie Xiangjun. Their 2 sons were just as excited, eagerly looking forward to meeting their new little sister.
We're going to China because you're going to get Sayla. China! I'm going to miss you. I'm going to miss you guys.
And we're going right here from Cleveland to Chicago.
Mommy,
And then Chicago over top of the world, all the way to Beijing. And then we go from Beijing to where Sayla lives over here in Guiyang.
On May 20, 2016, the couple arrived in Beijing. Although the 12-hour flight had left them utterly exhausted, the breathtaking sights of the Forbidden City and the Great Wall quickly lifted their spirits. They made an effort to understand the cultural background that their daughter had come from, hoping it would help them better guide her in the future. After 3 days of traveling, Becca and Dan finally reached the orphanage in Guizhou. Dan was the first to spot Xie Xiangjun. Despite the fact that he and his wife were both blonde-haired and blue-eyed foreigners, the little girl showed no fear. She simply seemed a little dazed by the strangers. Seeing this, Becca knelt down to lower herself to the child's level, hoping to bridge the gap between them. A staff member gently introduced the little girl to her new parents, and at last, Xiangjun timidly whispered, "Mama." Becca pulled out some of her son's toys to try and cheer her up. Seeing that the girl did not resist, she carefully reached out to offer a cuddle. Looking at Xiangjun's sweet, obedient little face, Becca felt her heart melt completely, though she could not help but speak to her in a soft, coaxing tone. Later, while Becca discussed details with the staff, Xiangjun sat nearby playing with her brother's toys, and even curiously interacted with her future father. Sensing that the 2 adults meant no harm, Xiangjun even shared some of her snacks with Becca. Becca looked over at her husband, her heart filled with joy. Squatting nearby with her camera, she captured the precious moment, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. After all the formalities were settled, Becca and Dan packed up their daughter's belongings and returned to the hotel they had been staying at. Wanting to bond with Xiangjun, Becca played with her like a child herself. They thought they would be heading back to America soon, but that night, the little girl suddenly burst into tears. Perhaps it was the sudden departure from the familiar orphanage that unsettled her. Shangjuan hardly slept a wink all night, and by the next morning, she was even vomiting. Becca quickly checked her temperature and realized she had developed a fever. The couple rushed to take her to the local hospital. Worried that the stress of long-distance travel and unfamiliar surroundings would only worsen her condition, they decided to delay their return until Shangjuan had fully recovered. To soothe her, Becca carried her around the room, and even took her outside for some fresh air and distraction. Under their tender and meticulous care, a smile finally returned to Shangjuan's face.
Hi, Sayla. Say hi, Daddy.
Hi, Daddy.
Oh, perfect. Say hi, Mommy.
Hello.
Perfect.
Since Shangjuan understood very little English, much of their communication relied on gestures. Later, Becca learned from their tour guide that Shangjuan's crying fit the previous night had simply been because she had wanted a glass of milk. From then on, Becca and Dan started teaching her English. To their delight, the little girl picked it up very quickly.
Do you want this?
Do you want it?
Do you want this? What do you say?
What do you say?
Wanting Shangjuan to experience more of her homeland, the couple took her traveling all across China, by boat and by train. Dan captured it all with his camera, hoping that one day, when their daughter grew up, she could look back on these memories. After staying in China for a full 2 weeks, Shangjuan not only regained her health but also grew closer to her new parents. They prepared to fly from Guizhou to the United States, and the last words the little girl spoke in China were, At that moment, Xie Xiangjun had no idea that her life was about to change forever. After more than 10 hours of long-haul flight, the family of 3 finally arrived in the United States. Their 2 sons had been waiting excitedly for their return. They rushed over with drawings they had made for their new little sister, unable to contain their excitement. Just 2 weeks earlier, Shangjuan had been an abandoned orphan. Now, she had a big family around her. She was someone's daughter, sister, niece, and more. Her uncles and aunts had decorated the house for a welcome party, hoping this adorable little girl would feel at home. But seeing so many unfamiliar faces all at once left Shangjuan overwhelmed. She had grown up speaking a rough Guizhou dialect, surrounded by dark-haired, yellow-skinned Chinese people. Now, she was thrown into a completely new world, and she felt a kind of helplessness she had never experienced before. Sensing her unease, Becca took her outside into the open yard, where everyone played together on the lawn. Slowly, the little girl began to relax and joined her brothers on the swings. From that moment on, the old Xie Xiangjun disappeared. She became Sayla. Still, Sayla struggled to adjust during her first month in her new home. Becca and Dan tried giving her all kinds of foods, but her Chinese stomach could not handle most of them. Often, she would gag and spit the food out. The only thing she truly enjoyed was macaroni. Even when she played with her brothers or fell asleep in her dad's arms, Sayla always clutched a cracker tightly in her hand, afraid she might not have food later. What broke everyone's hearts even more was that, because of her experience with abandonment, Sayla had a deep sense of insecurity. She often woke up multiple times during the night, startled and crying. Thankfully, Becca and Dan read her bedtime stories every night, and in the mornings, her brothers were right there waiting to play with her. The older brother was especially thrilled to have a little sister. The younger brother, however, who was less than a year older than Sayla, often competed for attention. He had been the baby of the family, used to having everyone's focus on him. Now, with a new little sister in the house, he felt like his throne was being challenged. At one point, he even said he wanted to dig a huge hole in the backyard and send Sayla back to China. But that plan did not last long. Sayla's adorable nature quickly melted his defenses. Maybe it is true what people say, being loved can truly change a person. Becca took Sayla to her very first movie. Her brothers took her swimming for the first time. And after that, Sayla experienced a whole series of firsts. Her first haircut, her first Christmas, her first marathon event, her first trip to Disneyland, and so much more. Slowly but surely, Sayla started to change. The little girl who had once been afraid to even step on grass was now running wild through the house and the yard every day. The girl who could barely eat was now eating well, gaining weight, and growing taller. Becca and Dan also loved taking the kids on trips. They visited Griffith Park to see the Hollywood sign, played in the waves at the beach, admired waterfalls at national parks, and explored Disneyland. Sayla loved all kinds of animated characters. When her brothers dragged her to military exhibitions, though, she would pout and call it boring. Whenever Sayla got tired from walking, Becca and Dan would take turns carrying her on their backs. Thanks to her parents, by the time Sayla was old enough for kindergarten, she had already traveled across much of America. She was no longer the abandoned Xie Xiangjun. She had become Sayla, the treasured daughter of a loving family. Fate had given her a painful beginning, but thankfully, she got a second chance to live a beautiful life.